Step with me into 1965, a year balanced between tradition and tremor. Harold Wilson speaks from Downing Street with the quiet confidence of a modernizer, while the Beatles' harmonies tumble from everyday transistor, carrying Britain into a bright new orbit. Yet behind the headlines and the jangle of pop anthems, another country persisted, one stitched from rituals so ordinary they barely merited mention, and so essential they bound the nation together. Picture dawn spilling across terraced streets, chimneys breathing pale smoke, milk bottles clinking against wooden doorsteps, the faint creak of prams pushed by mothers who knew every flagstone by heart. Life in the swinging 60s was never only about Carnaby Street or psychedelic posters. It was also about the steadfast pulse of home and neighborhood. Families carried on with habits shaped by war's aftermath, ration books only recently retired to kitchen drawers. To live in Britain then was to move in rhythm with others, each household a note in a shared song. From this quiet canvas rose figures who now feel like folklore. Chief among them, the rag and bone man, wheeling his horse-drawn cart through misty lanes, calling out in a voice half merchant, half minstrel, "Rag and bone, any old iron." Children dashed from sheds clutching bicycle chains, dented pots, yesterday's papers. His arrival was a pageant of barter. A goldfish in a sloshing bag, a pair of balloons, or a gleaming coin pressed into a small palm. To modernize, he was a recycler before the word existed, proof that nothing was entirely spent if someone could find its hidden worth. Metal would be smelted, fabric rewoven, even bones rendered into glue or feed. In an age before landfills overflowed, thrift was not a gesture but a philosophy. By Saturday, another ritual awaited the young, the sixpenny rush to the local cinema. For a handful of copper coins, the cost of a loaf and a bit, boys and girls flooded through red-painted doors into auditoriums scented with dust and lemon sherbet. Velvet seats sagged beneath generations of excitement. Projectors clicked like clockwork hearts. They watched cowboys thunder across arid plains, or Flash Gordon dangling over impossible chasms, their own breath caught between hope and peril. Managers armed with torches feigned severity while secretly delighting in the uproar. A single cliffhanger could feed a week of playground debates, knitting friends and strangers into a fellowship of suspense. Such scenes remind us that culture is never only what makes headlines. It is woven through these quieter spectacles. A horse cart on cobblestones, the hush before a reel begins, the laughter spilling into streets once the credits rolled. They tell of a Britain still close-knit, still prepared to share its stories aloud. How easily we forget that belonging once arrived not through algorithms, but through the press of neighbors' shoulders in a dimly lit hall, waiting for heroes to escape peril just in time. Sunday in 1960s, Britain was less a day than a gentle transformation. A pause in the week when families seemed to step out of their working selves and into something finer. Preparations began on Saturday night. Men pressing their best suits with military precision, every crease a declaration of respect. Women pinning their hair into curlers, patient through the tug and pull for the promise of smooth waves. Children scrubbed until their cheeks shone, shoes polished so bright they reflected the lamplight. By morning, entire streets gleamed with a quiet dignity, families spilling from front doors like polished ships sliding from a dock. The walk to church, or sometimes just to the local shops, became an informal parade of pride, each nod and smile affirming a shared sense of worth. That pride echoed again each evening in the most unassuming of sanctuaries, the local pub. As factory sirens or station whistles marked the end of the day, men trudged from gates to tap rooms, boots heavy with coal dust or machine grease, hands lined with honest graft. Inside, amber light and the yeasty scent of beer wrapped around them like an old friend. They didn't gather to drown troubles, but to release them, to trade the weight of work for the warmth of company. Conversation moved like a steady river. Work gossip to football speculation, small triumphs to private worries, all handled with the ease of men who had stood shoulder to shoulder through decades. Even the furniture held memory, the same stool claimed by the same customer, the barmaid's nod and unspoken welcome. These public houses were not businesses alone. They were the chambers where neighborhood opinion formed, where laughter or song could suddenly swell, uniting the room in a single heartbeat. And then came Monday, heralding a ritual both exhausting and curiously uplifting. Wash day. Before the whir of automatic drums softened domestic life, laundering clothes was an act of resolve. Kitchens morphed into steam-laden arenas. Huge copper boilers simmered, filling rooms with the sharp tang of soap. Shirts and linens were plunged, scrubbed on corrugated boards until knuckles reddened, then fed through the iron jaws of a mangle, their damp fibers flattened like pages, ready to be written anew. Back gardens blossomed into banners of cloth, lines heavy with garments snapping in the wind like the sails of a small armada. The choreography was communal. Neighbors lending pegs, comparing the brightness of their whites, or lending a hand when a stubborn sheet refused a line. Beneath the labor lay a quiet satisfaction, the sense that effort bound you not only to cleanliness but to the cadence of a shared Monday. What these customs reveal is a country where ordinary tasks bore the weight of meaning. Sunday best, evening pints, the weekly wash. They stitched households into something larger than themselves, a living fabric stretching across streets and estates. To wash your linen beside your neighbor, to share the same beer-soaked air, to measure your polish against another's shine, was to affirm membership in a story bigger than any single kitchen or taproom. In a world that now prizes speed and solitude, how easily do we let such bonds slip through our fingers, mistaking convenience for connection? When dusk settled on Britain's working-class streets, another ceremony began, one of warmth, voices, and quiet belonging. Families would gather around their wireless sets, the glow of valves casting amber halos across parlor walls. Cups of cocoa were prepared with almost priestly care, real powder whisked into hot milk, steam curling like incense. The air was alive with expectation as voices spilled from speakers. Serialized dramas, the low thrum of dance bands, and at the very end, the shipping forecast. That strange litany, Dogger, Fisher, German Bite, rolled across living rooms like gentle surf, tethering inland listeners to a coastline they might never see. In those moments, even the hum of the radio became part of Britain's heartbeat, uniting miners and clerks, mothers and children in a hush of shared listening. Saturday mornings brought a different sort of communion, louder and brimming with barter. Markets sprang to life in town centers and along cobbled streets, their awnings snapping in the breeze. Traders, heirs to generations of pitch keepers, barked out their wares in cadences honed to pierce the clatter. Lovely bananas, 6 for a bob. Fresh place caught this morning. They were part salesmen, part showmen, balancing crates with theatrical flair, measuring vegetables in polished brass scales. Shopping wasn't an errand but an exchange, a swirl of gossip, jokes, haggling, and mutual favor. Housewives won extra sprigs of parsley for loyalty. Children learned arithmetic at the speed of a butcher's change. The market's rhythm stitched people into a choreography of trust and recognition, where prices could bend for friendship and every sale ended with a nod that said, "We know each other here." And then came November's chill, when entire neighborhoods prepared for Guy Fawkes Night with a gusto that modern regulations would scarcely allow. Weeks before the 5th, children scoured alleys for broken chairs, fence posts, and cast-off doors, dragging their prizes to the patch where an enormous bonfire would rise. Rival streets competed for the highest stack, the finest effigy of the doomed plotter. Adults, feigning disapproval, quietly added old pallets or a sly splash of paraffin to ensure a blaze worthy of legend. When darkness finally arrived, crowds encircled the fire, its heat licking faces while sparks spiraled into the frosted sky. Potatoes baked in cinders, sparklers etched silver trails against the night. The mingled scents of wood smoke and gunpowder clung to scarves for days. It was chaotic, a little reckless, yet profoundly communal. A single roaring flame drawing together generations in laughter and awe. These rituals, though small beside the grand headlines of their decade, carried a gravity of their own. They offered more than entertainment or sustenance. They were stitches in the nation's social fabric, woven from repetition, generosity, and play. As radios give way to podcasts, markets to silent self-checkouts, In bonfires to carefully fenced displays, we might ask ourselves, in trading mess and spontaneity for safety and efficiency, have we dimmed some of the warmth that once burned so easily between neighbors? Morning in 1960s, Britain often began with a fragrance so inviting it seemed to belong to an older, slower world. The scent of bread, still warm from the baker's oven, drifting through the streets. Long before supermarket shelves or sealed plastic, the baker's van moved with quiet purpose, delivering crusty loaves and currant buns to waiting doorsteps. Children hovered by garden gates, hoping for the gift of an end crust, still hot enough to sting their fingers. Bakers knew their routes as though they were parish maps. Which house ordered 2 bloomers on Fridays? Who favored a split tin? Which elderly neighbor required her scones sliced because her hands had grown frail? The exchange was brief but tender, a nod or smile, a greeting that tethered breakfast tables to the pulse of the wider street. If bread was the morning's promise, Sunday dinner was its crowning ritual, a domestic theater enacted in kitchens up and down the country. Preparations stretched across 2 days, beginning with the careful choice of joint or bird, the peeling of potatoes stacked like pale stones, the mixing of Yorkshire pudding batter left to settle in its bowl. By mid-morning, the clatter of pans and hiss of roasting meat mingled with the crackle of radios playing hymn requests or light comedy. Families arrived bearing trifles, gravy boats, stories from the week. The dining table, dressed in its best cloth and guarded china, became a stage where grandparents and toddlers shared space, each course another thread binding the household together. When plates were cleared, conversations softened into laughter, and the promise of a walk, the Sunday constitutional, hovered gently in the air. That walk was no hurried exercise but a calm procession, part digestion, part reaffirmation of place. Couples strolled arm in arm, children darted along hedgerows, dogs trotted as though rehearsing an old routine. Routes were rarely new. They followed lanes to parks, circled local ponds, traced the perimeter of allotments heavy with autumn cabbages. Along the way, neighbors exchanged pleasantries about roses or the threat of rain, their voices lilting against the quiet of cars parked neatly at curbs. These constitutionals stitched residents to their geography, reminding them of who lived behind each garden gate, of how the seasons touched their own doorsteps. In these unhurried gestures lay an inheritance not measured by money or rank, but by the steady reassurance that life had a pulse, and you were part of it. The loaf torn apart while still steaming, the roast brought proudly to table, the unspoken choreography of a Sunday walk, all declared membership in a shared existence. Today, when the meals are eaten on the run and paths walked with eyes fixed on glowing screens, one wonders if the nourishment we seek is not only in the food or scenery, but in the slow, companionable rhythms that once tethered a whole country to its hearth and lane. Perhaps nothing captured the heartbeat of 1960s Britain more tenderly than the music people carried within them. Songs that could rise unbidden in pubs, living rooms, or at street corner gatherings. Long before karaoke machines or curated playlists, voices were the instruments of choice. A single line, maybe it's because I'm a Londoner or we'll meet again, could travel across a snug bar and coax a dozen throats to join. Some sang with rough edges, others with a tremble softened by stout or gin. But together they created harmonies far richer than perfection. These impromptu choruses were not performances, but declarations of kinship, a reminder that a community was more than shared postcodes. It was a choir of memories, losses, and hopes set to familiar melodies. Yet even as these traditions flourished, change was quietly entering British homes. Television, that glowing boxy newcomer, began to anchor families to the living room. First came a single set, often rented rather than owned, its screen a cloudy window through which moon landings and royal weddings flickered. By the decade's end, color broadcasts began tinting parlors with a novel glow, encouraging people to stay indoors instead of wandering to the local hall or lending their voices at the piano. Convenience arrived with a sly trade-off. The warmth of spontaneous sing-songs yielded ground to scheduled programs and solitary viewing. Elsewhere, the steady march of progress reshaped domestic tasks. Automatic washing machines, once a luxury seen only in department store demonstrations, began to edge their way into ordinary homes. They freed women, for it was mostly women, from the scalding coppers and mangles that had filled wash day Mondays. But liberation came at a price. The camaraderie of shared labor, the neighbor leaning over the fence to complement a line of spotless sheets, grew fainter as machinery turned toil into private routine. Even heating transformed the choreography of home life. Where once families had huddled around radios or open fires for warmth, central heating allowed each to retreat to separate rooms, warmth assured without the company that once accompanied it. Markets, too, felt the shift. Supermarkets sprouted at the edge of towns, their aisles broad and fluorescent, their prices neatly typed instead of bartered. Efficiency was intoxicating. Yet in the silence between shelves, something vanished. The banter of traders, the clink of scales, the sly wink offering a better apple for a regular. Modernity, with its gleaming promise, rearranged not only how Britons shopped, worked, or sang, but how they encountered one another in the everyday. None of these changes were villains. They granted comfort, hygiene, leisure, even new ways to see the world. But as the clatter of the old receded, an invisible web of connection frayed. Progress is often a bargain struck quietly, one generation accepting an unseen cost for another's gain. Looking back, we might ask, was it only labor and hardship we left behind? Or did we also loosen our hold on the rituals that taught us, in small, luminous ways, how to belong? By the time Britain stepped into the closing years of the 1960s, the country had begun to shed an old skin. From the ashes of post-war ration books to the shimmer of miniskirts and transistor radios, each decade since 1950 had layered fresh color onto the nation's canvas. First came the gray grit of rebuilding, then the buoyant pastels of prosperity, followed by the bold hues of rebellion and style. In these 25 years, ordinary life had stretched and flexed, the steady tread of milkmen and bakers giving way to the roar of motorways, the laughter of sixpenny matinees softening under the quiet glow of television screens. What endures from that vanished world, it is not only the list of customs, rag and bone men, market cries, Sunday constitutionals, but the texture of togetherness they carried. They were threads in a vast tapestry, woven from repetition and familiarity, reminding people of their place in a story larger than themselves. Each loaf passed across a doorstep, each pint poured in a snug bar, each song raised against a backdrop of cigarette smoke said, in its own small way, "You belong here. We are part of one another." Today, as we race through days ruled by notifications and schedules, we inherit a question from that quieter Britain. How do we keep hold of meaning in a world that moves faster than our memory? Perhaps the answer lies not in reenacting every detail. We cannot live forever among coal scuttles and wireless sets, but in reclaiming the spirit behind them. Community gardens where neighbors share tools and stories echo the cooperation of wash day lanes. Singing groups revive the warmth of voices joined without rehearsal. Even a simple walk, taken slowly and with curiosity, can summon the calm grace of the Sunday constitutional. History is never just a museum of objects. It is an invitation to notice how people once carved significance from the ordinary. The past teaches that belonging is not born from comfort alone, but from shared rituals that root us in place and time. Perhaps that is the real legacy of mid-century Britain. Not a catalog of habits, but a reminder that connection thrives wherever we choose to pause, to gather, and to give attention. So as we stand in our modern kitchens, holding bread sealed in plastic or scrolling through endless channels, we might let a sliver of that vanished rhythm whisper back. What stories could unfold if we slowed long enough to greet a neighbor, to hum an old tune, to walk familiar paths with eyes lifted from our screens? The 1960s are gone, but the invitation remains. To carry forward their sense of belonging, to craft new rituals worthy of memory, and to ask ourselves gently, what might we recover if we dared to move, once more, in step with one another?